We are so pleased to have now on this panel two amazing directors who have films in competition this year, one in the dramatic competition category, one in the documentary. Let's first meet Edson Oda of 9 Days. Tell us a little bit about your film.
Yeah, my film is a drama sci-fi about, it happens in a distant reality, and I call like a before life reality. And you have interviewers, and they interview souls to choose one soul that is going to be born. And even though like this, I say souls, they look like regular people like us, but they never lived before, but they already have a hint of their personalities, their morals, and what they're going to become when they come to the real world. So this movie tells the story of one of the interviewers, who's called Will. And during the whole movie, we're going to follow his process of selecting one candidate to be born, and all the other candidates is just going to disappear. And that's it.
That's it. Well, it's a very, very original concept. We wonder who, if we were to be chosen, if our souls would be chosen, if that was the competition, would we actually make it? That's interesting. And Bao has a very interesting film. Tell us about Be Water.
So I guess many people might be able to figure out what Be Water refers to. So it's a documentary about Bruce Lee, kind of unpacking the myth of Bruce Lee and figuring out who he was as a person, but also it's kind of a coming of age of what it means to be American in the 1960s, and also looking at it as a coming of history of like how the perception and the depiction of Asians over decades have led up to Bruce Lee not being able to make it in Hollywood before his death.
And the reason I wanted to have the two of them together is because in their own ways, to me, they break new ground. Like right now, there's no limit, I think, to our imaginations. And you have an interesting personal background, which I think inspired you to make this film. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
I think despite the very surreal premise, I feel like it's very grounded in a personal experience of mine. And the main character, Will, actually was based on an uncle of mine, that he was a very sensitive person, a very kind human being. And then when he was 12 and he was 50, he committed suicide. And it was interesting because almost like a turning point, when he did that, almost like he becomes this figure of failure that erased everything else that he did in his life. And for me, it was very impactful in a way that it's almost like he wasn't ready to the real world. He wasn't tough enough to survive this real world. And I think I carry a lot about this fact when I was writing 9 Days, and somehow it's a way to just connect with my uncle. We also celebrate. It's interesting because I remember about his death, but I think it's a way to celebrate his life, And anyway, we're so attached to some moments, and the blind. When you go like through some bad moments, we just have blind spots in our soul and mind, and you can see exactly what's around us, what can be beautiful. It can be very simple, but very magical. And I think 9 Days is about this magic that you see every day, but you forget because we go through a lot of struggle, and it's very natural, very human.
Beautiful. And how long did you think about making this film? You had done a lot of commercial work and beautiful, directing in many other areas. What finally got you to think about this as a film?
For me, it was I came from advertising, and I was advertising. I think there's something that can be artistic, but at the same time, it's not like you're always selling a product. So you're never expressing your voice as an artist. So for me, it was always something somehow I was repressing myself. So there's a point when I decided I have to create advertising. I'm from Brazil, so I don't look Brazilian. That's what everyone tells me. But when I came to US to start filmmaking, I was just like seeking for. I want to tell my stories. I want to, tell something, touch other people's, souls, and I was just writing a bunch of scripts, and I was never like really connected to the stories I really want to tell. And then I felt like I don't care if this project's gonna happen or not, or I just gonna write something small, personal, that I can share with the world. And if no one likes it in a way they can finance or do anything, I can shoot myself. I can just make it by like 100K or something. Now it's much more than that. But And then I wrote 9 Days. I feel like it comes from like this retrospect about, you know, my uncle, about the world, about these values, about good and bad. It's worth to be good. It's worth to keep fighting. Is life good or not? You know, it's all about the struggles I'm going through, and also going back to my uncle and seeing like, oh wow, while I was going through struggles, I felt like also that's how we felt, and that connected me to him, and also made me write the script in the way that I wrote it. So that's pretty much, I talked a lot, but it's pretty much where this comes from.
Do you feel like his spirit was watching over you in a way?
I don't know. I feel there was some. I don't know. I'm so nervous about like the premiere, but I think somehow it was interesting because when he died, I couldn't even cry. You know, it was something that for me I didn't feel the connection. So and I blame myself for that. And now, you know, understanding more here what he went through and make this movie, I feel more connected to him, for sure, in a way that I never felt before.
Interesting. Bao, so you, I know you've been thinking about Bruce Lee, making a movie about him for a long time. Tell us about the genesis of all this, which I had a little something to do with, actually.
So Janet introduced me to Shannon Lee about 5 years ago, and that was when the project kind of started developing. I think I'm very grateful that I was able to be able to tell Bruce's story. I mean, this is a version of Bruce's story. Everyone has their entry point into Bruce Lee, and there's no such thing as like a definitive film about anyone. But I feel like I always wanted to tell Bruce Lee's story in a way that reflected my own experiences as an Asian American. My parents were Vietnamese War refugees, and I was born in the States, so I always kind of felt a little out of place. I never felt quite home in America. And just examining Bruce's life when he first arrived in Seattle, and he didn't, he was trying to negotiate what it meant to be American, and I think a lot of Asian Americans and people of color also do that. We kind of are figuring out our place in the world. And one thing that was important for me is that Bruce's story is very much an American story. People usually think of him as a global icon without thinking about the origins of where that mythology and iconography came from. So for me, it's about unpacking the mythology and unpacking who he was as a person and the struggles that he went through as an Asian American in 1960s Hollywood. I mean, it's hard enough being a person of color today in Hollywood. Just imagine being an actor or actress in that time when, we're coming off World War II, coming off the Korean War, and we're starting to send troops over to Vietnam. So the Asian face, the Asian image, is very much the image of the enemy. But Bruce never saw it that way. He understood that. He hoped that people would just see him for who he was.
You Edson, in a way, you created a dreamscape, right? That was that. And Bruce, in his own way, was dreaming. What would you say to audience members about this idea of dreaming versus reality? We really have to find a weird balance between the two. It can't be all just one or the other, right? What would you say? I know it's a very abstract question, but I feel like it's so relevant.
What do you mean, like when you're writing a story, or when you're trying to...
When you're imagining a story and how far you can go with it, and sounds so original.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just every artist has to have a voice and has to, it's hard for me to just tell what you need to do or not. But I can say what kind of works for me. I feel like if you want to dream and just do like anything that doesn't make any sense, and it's great, and you're happy with it, and some people connect to it, it's great. But I think for me, it was more like I always want to explore these words that somehow they feel dreamy and they have like some kind of surrealism attached to it, but at the same time, somehow they're very grounded. So like my word, as you could see, in terms of concept, is very pretty much like surreal. And you imagine like just sci-fi or something like that, but I always feel like, how can I bring this to something that feels very realistic and very grounded and you can see yourself in that, in the picture, and then you can see a family, a member of a family, or you can see a friend, and you can see yourself. And I think that, for me, what's the beauty of like making a film? It's not reality itself, but somehow, you bring elements that makes the audience connect. So it always has to be real, somehow feel real, but it doesn't need to be real at all. It's like kind of a, it's not very smart what I said, but I think but it's kind of both. But yeah.
Did you ever struggle between how far into the dream world you could get, or did other people try to rein you in and say let's be more?
I think there is a moment when you get stuck to your dream, it just makes sense to you. And I think the danger, not danger, but I think what can mean like a lack of connection of your audience is when you dream by yourself. And I feel like the thing is sharing your dream. So when you share your dream, it's almost like bring everything that's very personal, but try to find the tools and the language to communicate that in order to reach the most people you can, or the people who kind of live in kind of believe in the same thing you believe, or maybe you want to convince other people the things they believe in. But I think then you need the language, and I think filmmaking, in my way of seeing, is my language. I have dreams, I have feelings, and I have things that I want to share. And through filmmaking, I connect to try to connect to the audience.
So I have a similar question with you, Bao, in terms of how did Bruce dream his future? I mean, it almost seems so unlikely that he could have this dream. It had never happened before. We never had an Asian male star on screen. What do you think allowed him to have his dreams?
I mean, I think it's just kind of like persistence and persevering and believing in like the idea of self-expression without having someone else tell you what you're supposed to be. When he kind of hit his stride is when he was writing his own stories and directing and also acting. And I think it's important that we do tell our own stories that are honest. It's not about just I make documentaries. I also do fiction, but in documentaries, it's the idea of being accurate or factual. I don't try to delve into those kind of words. I think about honesty and authenticity, and so that's why this film for me is about being honest to what Bruce meant to me as an Asian American and what he meant to many others. And to kind of just go on a little tangent, there's Ocean Vuong, who's one of my favorite poets. He was telling me how people, when he wanted to make a second project, like people of color are expected to make memoir, because that's how we can be kind of tour guides to white Americans in a way. Like we are expected to guide you through our world, but we're not expected to create our own world ourselves. And I think Bruce was very into creating his own world. He knew that you can start with being honest and truly expressing yourself, but to be able to craft your own world, that's like a beautiful thing. And I hope Sundance and filmmakers today realize that you can tell your own story, but you also can tell other stories, and don't let people tell you like you're not good enough, you don't have the potential to world build as a filmmaker, as a storyteller.
If there's ever a place where we do see dreams come true, I think this is one of them, right? Okay, we have room for maybe one question, if anybody has one.
Better be good.
Yeah, better be good. So, do we have one? Yes, one. Oh, Hernan.
Hello, thank you for putting this amazing panel together. It's so endearing to see the overflow of people here in support. My question is, as an Asian American filmmaker, I had a film in Sundance last year called Knock Down a House.
Bravo.
Thank you. A big task of that project was to create more representation in places of power. In this case, U.S. Congress, that can be more representative of the diversity of our country. But we're faced with systems that are structurally conditioned to exclude certain members of society. And as an Asian American storyteller, I feel sometimes when faced with a system, industry, who the previous panelist said, will devalue your work. How do you summon the courage to value your own self, to be able to tell the world your story?
The question?
I mean, it takes. It's a very. It would take me a long time to really answer it, but I mean, it takes community like this. Honestly, like there's a power in numbers. It's not individuals just doing their own thing, but it's becoming a voice, going out, like doing what Janet does with Gold House and Gold Open, because we need people to watch our stories. We can't. It's not just about creating the stories. I think, like.
Right.
It's not just about writing, this idea of like the American dream about writing your story, but being able to tell it to a larger audience. Like, we have to kind of, I don't want to sound like cheesy, but Gandhi, like, be the change we wish to see in the world, right? And so we have to kind of power up in a way, level up. And I think we're seeing that. There's a lot that needs to be changed, but we have to kind of keep on pushing that boulder over that hill until it starts rolling down the other side. We can't give up pushing that boulder up.
I think I'm totally echoing his words, and I feel like also focusing on the work itself, and let the work speak, and there is like the Neil Gaiman, and like there's a quote that no matter what happens, just make good art. And I feel like sometimes we have to be, blind and deaf for some, things around us. It's just whatever happens, I'm just going to focus on my work, and my work is going to speak so loud that they will hear it, they will listen, because it's going to be so good, it's going to be so personal, it's so great that there's no way they won't listen it. I'm going to make they listen it. So I think that's.
And I have to say personally, I have seen huge change. If we just talk about the Asian American community, huge change. And it does take contributions from all people, the content creators, the supporters, the people who write about it, the people who, who go see the movies. And it is possible. Now, I feel more encouraged now than ever, I have to say. And looking at this room gives me more encouragement. So thank you so much. Let's thank Edson Oda and Bao Nguyen
Thank you so
for their
much.
incredible work. Go see their films and support, and dream. Dream on, dream on. That's the theme of this panel.